Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In our study of the schemes and tropes, we have up till now covered the figures which involve repetition, and these figures which involve repetition of words and sounds are included in the schemes. Now, when we study the literary devices or figures of speech which involve the repetition or which create balance, order and rhyme, we include such devices in schemes. In our study of these schemes or such figures of speech which create order, balance, rhyme and similarity, we looked at two types of schemes which were figures involving repetition at the level of sound as well as figures involving repetition at the level of words. Then we moved on to our study of tropes, and in tropes in the last few lectures we have had a look at those tropes which involve semantic irregularity, and semantic irregularities are connected with the change in meaning. Now in today's lecture we will have a look at some further tropes which will be analyzed with the help of a few examples so that we understand their use, their function, their importance, as well as their meaning in the literary writings. Now, schemes include figures involving repetition, and those figures of repetition operate either at the level of word or at the level of sound. As far as the tropes are concerned, we can involve into tropes certain devices which involve semantic irregularities. There can be figures or schemes which involve comparison. There can be figures or tropes which involve substitution, and there are such figures which involve addition or amplification of meaning. So these are the different categories into which we divide the figures of speech or schemes and tropes. Figures which involve repetition are broadly called schemes, and figures which involve semantic irregularity, which involve comparison, which involve substitution, and which involve addition and amplification are all termed as tropes. Because in our distinction between what tropes are and what schemes are, we looked at the fact that schemes create form, whereas tropes turn meaning. So all those devices which create symmetry in form and are not concerned with the meaning are referred to as schemes, whereas those figures of speech or literary devices which turn the meaning, which add to the meaning, or which magnify the meaning, or which transfer meaning from one domain to another are all referred to as tropes. Tropes are a bit more complicated as far as their understanding is concerned or their interpretation is concerned, because they turn meaning, they change meaning. So when there is a change in meaning, there is a complexity that perplexes the reader, and here is where the reader is supposed to make connections and draw inferences to reach to the more accurate and clear understanding or interpretation of such a device. Let us today have a look at the figures which involve comparison. In such figures which involve comparison, the author transfers one word into a foreign semantic field. It means that the author or a poet, when he uses a figure which involves comparison, he would transfer the one entity from its place to another. For example, observe the use of a simile, where somebody is referred to as cool as cucumber. Now, a human being's cool attitude is explained by comparing it with a very refreshing and cool vegetable. So, one domain of meaning that exists with the description, attributes and qualities of a human has been transferred to another domain, that is the vegetation. So, in order to explain what one thing looks like, the author would choose to compare it and match it with something that the reader is familiar and which has the same quality, attribute, or you can say significance. So in these figures of speech, which are referred to as figures of comparison, the author or a poet transfers a word into a foreign semantic field to illustrate or to picture his thought and evoke the appropriate feeling in the readers. In this way, the writer draws comparison between two things which are quite unlike, but they appear similar on certain grounds. Now, a vegetable and a man are two unlike things. There is no comparison. But on one ground, where the cool and good attribute or attitude is concerned, that cucumber and human become the same. So it would appear to be unlike comparison, but it has something in common. The subject matter is real, but the thing to which it is compared is presented in imagination. So in our mind, or through the eye of the mind, we envision a similarity, we envision the sameness. And that which the subject and things are compared to have in common is not stated. So the comparison states one thing is like the other, but on what grounds, on what basis it is the same as other is to be discerned by the reader. So the writer does not explicate the comparison. He just refers to one thing as another, as cool as cucumber, as cold as ice. Now, ice as an object or a thing is the most cold a thing, and when a human being is compared to the ice on being cold, the reference that the reader might draw, or the inference that the reader might draw, might be that there is lack of emotions, there is lack of feelings, there is insincerity of a person. That is why somebody is being compared with ice. That turning cold as ice reveals a person becoming devoid or deficient of the human emotions, of warmth, of sympathy, of love, of compassion. But we don't really feel that the ice would have the same emotions. The human being has the emotions, but now here in this comparison, the human being has been referred to as having got the quality of an object or an entity that does not have the attributes of humanity, and becoming cold as ice is losing humanity, losing compassion. So this interpretation is what a reader draws when he understands the similarities and the differences between the two things, that how the two are apart on the basis of being of a different domain, but how on a single quality, which is the intense cold attitude of a human, as well as the cold feeling that an ice would draw, is what they are both comparable at this level. So that which the subject and the things are compared to in common is not stated and must be discussed, and it has to be validated and understood by the reader or the interpreter from other indications in the story or in the text or in the poem. And the interpreter or the reader must also try to articulate the mood evoked by that figure. So the comparison would have been of no use had the writer not thought about the fact that he wants to evoke a particular feeling, emotion, mood in the reader. He wishes to convey some sort of forceful emotive experience to the reader. So comparing somebody to ice on the basis of being cold, inhuman, is what would evoke in a reader a feeling of maybe indifference, hatred and dislike for the person who is referred to as cold as ice. Now a person who is cold as ice would not take or get our approval. He would be dismissed as a negative person, or the reader too would feel a sort of enmity or hatred towards that person who has been referred to as cold as ice. Now let us have a look at some of the figures which involve comparison, and one of the most dominant and significant of such tropes or figures of speech which is used to elaborate and explain a comparison is a metaphor. Metaphor is very common and favorite device or figure of speech that the writers and poets make use of in their writing. And metaphors encompass wealth of meaning and understanding. They may transfer meaning from one domain to another so artistically that a reader at times feels wonder or is in awe of such a comparison that elaborates either the feelings of a character, the emotions of the character, and the experiences of the character. So metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase literally denoting one object or idea is applied to another. and it suggests a likeness or a similarity or an analogy between them. So the two things which are compared seem to be quite different apart in all the aspects, but only on a closer understanding and scrutiny would they seem to be logical and have some similarity. Metaphor is such a figure of speech or a figure of comparison in which we relate two things which are quite dissimilar or unlikely things. And this unlikely comparison or this comparison of two dissimilar things results in an image in the mind's eye. So we picture sort of description in our imagination on the basis of the similarities drawn through that comparison. This comparison aids the reader usually in understanding a comparison. So when some idea becomes very complex and very much complicated and difficult for the writer to elaborate or explain with long descriptive lines, he chooses to explain it with the help of a metaphor. I often discuss this example in our understanding of the metaphor. There is a celebrated example that is, my love is like a red rose. Now, instead of saying that love is an experience that the poet or the speaker draws joy from, or instead of saying that love is an experience that has got its pros and cons both, that it is painful too, he has compared it with something that has got both the qualities. Now, comparing love with a rose makes the reader understand that this metaphor explains everything that the writer might have wished to explain through to the reader with the help of maybe long elaborate lines. Saying that love is like a red rose helps us understand that rose is beautiful, rose is bright, rose is fragrant, rose is the image of beauty, that how much positive an image of love rose presents. But at the same time, rose has got thorns. Rose is short-lived. Rose would lose its fragrance pretty soon. It would wither out. It would, scatter or lose its petals as well. It can even be, destroyed by wind or rain or storm. So now such attributes, either positive or negative, when we as a reader analyze about this comparison, we understand how beautifully or how much in a more precise and compact a manner the writer has been able to explain all the pros and cons, all the advantages and disadvantages associated with the experience of love. So this is the power and beauty of metaphor. This is the power and beauty of a comparison, that it allows the writer to avoid or to skip long boring descriptive lines and passages, and it even stimulates the reader's imagination. It evokes a feeling of freshness. It evokes sort of emotions of the readers as well. So this literary writing that has to have impact on the reader, not only in terms of giving him or her information, but also letting the reader exercise his mind, exercise his rational faculties to understand what is implicit, what is implied or hidden within a word or a comparison. So in our understanding of this metaphor that love is red rose, we as a reader understand the similarities and the differences between the red rose and love. That we know that like rose, love is often thorny and it is also fragile yet beautiful like a rose. A metaphor is more, you can say, appropriate device for the writers when they have to elaborate or explain feelings. So a metaphor establishes a relationship at once or directly to the reader, and it leaves more to the imagination. So a metaphor lets the reader draw inferences. It does not explicate things or ideas, and metaphors are closely related to our imagination. As we know, Wordsworth has stated about poetry that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So a poet, through metaphor, transfers the powerful feelings to the reader. At the disposal of the writer is a device which is compact, which is complicated and also intricate. So to convey the feelings and emotions to the reader, he chooses to use a powerful metaphor which would transfer the feelings and would let the reader understand the idea without a writer's explanations. A metaphor implies that one thing is another thing. One thing is like another thing, or closer to another thing, or similar to another thing, then saying that it is, it resembles something. So in this way we say that it's a direct comparison. Why do we say metaphor is a direct comparison? Because it does not say that something is like another. Rather it says something is another thing. So that is the difference of calling something like something and saying something is something else. So that is why we call it a direct comparison. It is a figure of speech in which a word or a phrase that ordinarily designates one thing is used for something else, thus making implicit a comparison. Why it is an implicit? Because the reader has to interpret and draw inferences. It is not explicit, it is not open, it is not clear. So a metaphor is such a comparison which is implicit, which is thought-provoking, which is a direct comparison too. Here we do not suggest that something resembles another thing. Rather we say that two things are the same. And which two things are the same? Which appear to be quite different. Look at these examples, then you will understand how a metaphor is a direct comparison, how a metaphor is an implicit comparison. It's a line taken from Shakespeare's poem, All the World is a Stage, that he used in his play As You Like It. In it, Shakespeare says, all the world is a stage and all the men and women merely players. Now he says, all the world is a stage and men and women merely players. So this is a direct comparison where the poet is comparing the world with a stage that is there in the theater, where you watch performances, where you watch actors acting their roles. So a theater, stage, and the world at large is what a comparison is between. He's not saying that world is like a stage. He's saying world is a stage. There is no difference between a stage where characters act different roles and the world where different human beings lead different lives. And then he says men and women are players, they are actors. So the world is seen as a larger, broader stage or a play, an action of a play, and women and men, all the humanity, human race is seen as actors. So this is what we refer to as a direct comparison, where human beings are compared to actors and the world is compared to a stage where actors act. Look at another example of direct comparison, that is from Edward Fitzgerald's translation of Rubaiyat of Umar Khayyam. He states, leaves of life keep falling one by one. Now, what are the leaves of life? Leaves of life is a comparison between the years, the days that one spends in the world, and the leaves that that a tree sheds. So just the way in the winter and in the autumn season, a tree would shed its leaves, similarly a human being, through his progress in age, sheds the years or days and hastens towards old age or death. So leaves of life is a comparison where the years of life or the days of life has been replaced with the word leaves. There is no difference for the poet between a tree's falling leaves and the human beings, you can say decreasing age or years. Another example to understand the use of metaphor is from P.B. Shelley's famous Ode to the West Wind, where Shelley says, I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed. Now, thorns of life. You may come across thorns in a forest or in a wilderness or in some place that is not well kept. But thorns of life is a comparison, direct comparison between the thorns of bushes that prick us or that hurt us or that make us bleed, and between the troubles of life, the hardships of life. So the hardships of life are compared with the thorns that make our body get bruised or hurt. So this is the direct comparison. Look how much beauty does it add to poetry. If a poet says that he falls upon the thorns of life and he bleeds, he doesn't mean it literally, that he has fallen down on some ground where he had been hurt by or pricked by the thorns. He doesn't really intend to give a literal sense to his idea. What he wants to evoke is the imagery of a man getting hurt and getting the pain and bleeding, as if it is the physical pain that is excruciating or that is too unbearable, what you would experience after getting hurt by the thorns. It is the same as a person would experience by his getting hurt with the hurdles, difficulties and sorrows of life. The sorrows would hurt the soul and the thorns would hurt the body. But the comparison is between the thorns of life, that is not the thorns lying on the path, but the thorns in the form of difficulties and hurdles in the path of life. So it's a metaphor where directly the writer has compared thorns with difficulties, and then in the previous line, leaves of life compared to years of life, age of a human being, and the stage is compared to the world, or the world is compared to the stage where characters or actors perform. So a metaphor, you can see, elaborates something in such a way that it is the reader who is to make use of his imagination. A reader would try to judge what are the similarities between the two things which are compared. Why one thing is replaced with another. Why he says he falls on thorns of life. Thorns of life is the difficulty or the trouble that he is facing in his life. Now that we know that a metaphor is a direct comparison where one thing is replaced with another, and the comparison makes us understand the similarities between the two things, that why two unlike things are the same. There are a few kinds of metaphor as well. If you explore these kinds, you would understand that how writers, on the basis of the use and the need, would replace one type of metaphor with another, or make use of one type of metaphor than another. To understand what are the various kinds of metaphor, we will observe just the 4 kinds of metaphor, which are what we will study with the help of examples from a few poems too. The first type of metaphor is referred to as concrete metaphor, and in concrete metaphor we attribute the physical existence to an abstraction. We grant physical power, we grant physical existence to something that is an abstraction, or that is not present as a substance or a thing in the world. For example, the pain of separation, the light of learning, the fruits of grief. Now grief is not a tree which would bear the fruit. Now learning is not a bulb or a tube light or a sun or star that would emit light. So light of learning, fruits of grief reveal that we have attributed physical existence to an abstraction. Right? In this way we see that something that is not concrete, something that is not either a living thing or an animate thing, we allow it to express or experience something that a human being or an entity that is animate would experience. Another type of metaphor is called animistic metaphor. Animistic metaphor, as the very name suggests, here we attribute animate characteristics to inanimate things. Animate characteristics are those which are there in either the humans or animals or the living things. Things which can move, which can breathe, which can show life. When we use animistic metaphor, here we are giving the qualities of an animate thing, a living thing, to a non-living thing. For example, we say angry sky or shoulder of the hill. Now the sky cannot be angry, as it is not a living thing. Anger is the quality of a human being or maybe an animal too. And then shoulder of the hill. The hill is not a human which would have a shoulder or an arm or a foot. So we say foot of hill or shoulder of hill. We are giving the quality of animacy to something that is not human. So something that is not animate. So we see that concrete and animistic metaphors differ on these levels. That concrete metaphor gives concreteness to something that is an abstraction, and animistic metaphor gives animation to something that is inanimate. The third type of metaphor is humanistic metaphor. As the very name suggests, that in humanistic metaphor we would assign humans' qualities to non-human things. So animistic metaphor attributes characteristics of humanity to what is not human. For example, if we call friendly river, ferocious wind, wandering clouds, quiet forest, these qualities would be of a human being, which we have attributed to the river, to the water, to the clouds, to the forest. So humanistic metaphor assigns qualities of a human being to something that is non-living or not human. Then comes the fourth type of metaphor, that is referred to as synthetic metaphor. As the name suggests, it is the synthesis or combination of something. So in synthetic metaphor, we combine or synthesize two attributes or two qualities. Look at these examples of a beaker full of warm south, blue stumbling buzz. So in these examples, the first example by Keats in his Ode to the Nightingale, he says of a beaker full of warm south. Now here the last two words, warm south, are concrete things or something that you can observe, but they are synthesized, they are combined. For example, warm. Warmth is what you feel, as you can experience it as a feeling, and south is the physical location or place. Now place and feeling of warmth are combined, so they become synthetic metaphor. Warmth is what you can feel with your touch, with your skin, and south is what you see either through sight or you reach to by covering the distance. So these metaphors are combining place and feeling. In the second line you can see blue uncertain stumbling buzz, used by Emily Dickinson in her poem I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died. Here she calls the buzz or the sound as blue. Now the sound should have been either sharp or piercing or low, but the sound is referred to as blue. Blue is the sense that is conveyed through the sense of sight, that's the color. And apart from color, we see that she has associated it or combined it with sound. So when sound and sight are combined, we say that it's a concrete metaphor, or it's something that is synthesizing the two things, so it is synthetic. That blue and buzz, blue the color, buzz the sound, are synthesized or combined. Similarly, warm, that is felt, that is more like a feeling, is combined with the sight or with the place, that is south, place and feeling, and here color and sound are combined. So such sort of metaphors are rare to be found, and they are very much amazing for the reader to see that how buzz can be blue, buzz can be sharp, buzz can be high, but it cannot be of any color. Now south is referred to as warm, as if you are feeling it through touch. So these are the four kinds of metaphors: concrete metaphor, animistic metaphor, humanistic metaphor, and synthetic metaphor. Now let us move to the second figure of speech, which is referred to as a figure of comparison. It's a very simple and common figure of comparison that you often come across in poetry and even your day-to-day language as well, where you often compare somebody with another thing with the help of the word like and as. So it is a simile, that is a comparison between two things of unlike nature, and the way we identify simile in any text or writing is that a writer makes use of the word like or as that yet have something in common. So with the help of the word like and as, we compare two unlike things because we find some point of similarity between the two. Look at this example that states silence settled on the audience like a block of granite. Silence settled on the audience like a block of granite. Now the block of granite is a stone or a heavy load or a burden, whereas silence has no such existence. Silence is just absence of speech. Now absence of speech or silence is compared with the heavy load of granite or a heavy stone. Just the way a heavy stone, if it falls on something, it would, make it die, or it would make it silent, or it would hide it. The silence has fallen on the audience as if it is difficult to live, as if it is like a load too heavy to be lifted. So silence in this example is compared to a block of granite or a stone. It is something heavy which is difficult to be lifted or removed, and the image is that of sadness, grief, absoluteness, as if after hearing something sad or something tragic, the audience has become silent, that nobody stirs, nobody speaks. So they are silent as if something heavy has fallen upon them. So look at the emotion. Look at the emotive force of such devices, either metaphor or simile. They make us envision something that more or operates more at the level of emotion and feeling rather than the graphic presentation. You do not really literally say that a load of some granite or a stone has been put on the heads and shoulders of the audience. You don't literally imagine such a thing. You realize the depth of the grief that some tragic incident that the audience has seen maybe in a movie or a picture is that the silence is the result of. So it's the level of emotions and feelings at which the literary devices or figures of comparison like simile and metaphor operate. Observe a few more examples of simile. Look at this one from Robert Burns, where he says, "Oh, my love, like the melody that's sweetly played in tune." So Robert Burns compares his love to a melody, a tune, a song, a composition of music. So we know that there is difference. Love is the beloved. Love is the emotion. But here it is compared with the use of the word like, as it is a simile, to a musical composition or a song or a tune. Now what are the similarities? The song or a tune is soothing and comforting. It relaxes you, it comforts you, it's romantic too, it's refreshing too. So is the love for him. That is why he compares his love with a melodious tune. Then in the second example, Chaucer says about the squire that he is as fresh as the month of May. So the squire is as fresh as the month of May. Now it is a man who is being compared with the month of May. So it's an unlike comparison. Man is a human being and month of May is an abstraction. So the freshness of the month of May, where there is so much you can say freshness, beauty of spring around, as in the context of Europe or England, the freshness, the youth of the squire is what the comparison evokes. So on the basis of the abundance of beauty, abundance of energy, joy, and the feeling of freshness, the poet has compared a squire or a man with the month of May. Look at this example from William Shakespeare. He says, "How like the winter hath my absence been." Now the character is saying that his absence from a place had been like a long spell of winter, that has been of quietness, that has been of grief, that has been of coldness. So he's comparing his absence like the season of winter has come to occur or to stay in the lives of the people who have been away from the speaker, who is saying that his absence was long, painful, and of really sad a moment for the people who might have missed her or have been living without him. Another example is from Samuel Tyler Coleridge. He says, as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. So, as idle, as motionless. So, the lack of movement and lack of animacy in the ship that is painted on a painting, or that is a description of a painter or an artist, is what he's comparing himself with, that he's as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. That painted ship is not moving in the sea, it's not moving in the water, it's not stirring the water, it's not going anywhere, it's idle. So as idle as the ship that is painted. This is what he compares his life with. Now let us move, after the understanding of metaphor and simile, to another type of comparison, that is personification. Now metaphor is a direct comparison, simile is a comparison with the help of the words like as and like. And personification too is a comparison in which you directly compare one thing with another, but you invest human qualities to the non-humans or non-living things. This is the identity of personification. Personification means the investment of non-human subjects such as abstractions, inanimate objects, animals, with human qualities or attributes. Here too we see that the things which are compared are different or unlike in nature, but the thing to which the comparison is made is always a person. So this is the identity of personification, that one thing that is an object is compared with another thing, and the thing which it is compared to should always be a human being. So this figure is used to stir emotions. This figure of speech or figure of comparison is used to make us sympathize or empathize with an object, entity, abstraction, or a thing, because that thing is given the qualities of a human being. For example, if it is said that the land mourns, the soil languishes. Now the land or the earth cannot mourn. Look, that this entity, earth or land, has been invested with the human quality of languishing and mourning. So if a soil is referred to as languishing, crying, mourning, or wailing or complaining, we see that these qualities or attributes are specific to human beings. And when any thing like soil or earth or woods or trees or mountains are invested with these qualities which human beings exhibit, we develop empathy, we develop sympathy for these things. So the human attributes of mourning and languishing are attributed to the land, thus making a comparison, a direct comparison. But the thought is of extreme sorrow, extreme disaster that is ruining the earth, like it is in the form of maybe some calamity or a famine, and the feeling that is evoked is of sadness, that if the earth is mourning, if the soil is languishing, then it means that everything is in tragic state or in a bitter state. So the emotion of sadness and grief that a human being is capable of is associated with earth, that is an abstract thing. So that is how it becomes personification, because a human being's attributes are assigned to a non-human thing. Let us now discuss one of the more complicated and more difficult sorts of comparisons. As we have looked at three types of comparisons or figures of comparisons. The first one was metaphor, the second one was simile, and the third one was personification. Now the identity of all these is that metaphor is a direct comparison when one thing is substituted for another. The simile is a comparison with the help of the words like you, as, and like. And then we come to the understanding of the personification, where we know that personification occurs when something non-human or some entity or abstraction is given the qualities of a human being. So this is how we recognize all these three types of figures of comparison. Now let us look in the end at the idea of conceit, because conceit too is a figure of comparison. But what sort of comparison it is, how is it different from a metaphor, is to be understood. And conceit is a figure of speech or a figure of comparison in which two vastly different objects are linked or like. They are sort of presented as they are same, they are likened with the help of similes or metaphors. It can also be the use of a simile or a metaphor that may extend a comparison. So conceit develops a comparison which is exceedingly imaginative. So it depends on the imaginative power of the writer, his rational faculties, that he draws a comparison between two unlike things. He extends it or he elaborates it. So it becomes an extended metaphor sort of a thing, that is a conceit. So conceit develops a comparison which is exceedingly unlikely but is nonetheless intellectually imaginative. So it would appear to be very odd, unusual, unbelievable, but it will be exciting, and intellectually it will be very creative and imaginative. A comparison turns into a conceit when the writer tries to make us admit a similarity between two things of whose unlikeness we were strongly conscious of and we were very much sure of. For this reason, conceits are such comparisons which often surprise us, bewilder us, they charm us. So the difference between a metaphor and conceit is that a metaphor might appear true to us on our understanding because the similarity or the differences between the two things which are compared are obvious. But here in a conceit, these comparisons seem to be made between two very far-fetched, different, unusual, odd and unlike things. What we term that there is no match between the two things is what a person or a thing may be compared to. For example, if somebody calls another person a boat. Now, if a human being is compared to a boat, such a comparison is very odd, unusual, and it is intellectual too, because if you elaborate upon the very idea of a conceit of a boat used for a man, it would be like just like a boat needs a sailor and it needs a guide, it needs to be taken to the shore. We human beings too need guidance and help. And just as a boat is at the mercy of the waves, weather and the sea, a man too is at the mercy of the circumstances and experiences in the world. And then the boat is something that is in the journey. Or just like that, a human being too is in the process of journey or is going through the experiences. So such is the force and power of a conceit, that two unlikely and dissimilar things are compared, which you would dismiss in the first understanding or first encounter. But on a closer scrutiny and investigation, you realize that the writer has made a very unusual, imaginative and intellectual comparison between two unlike things. For example, it will not surprise us to hear something if someone says that you are a snail or you are slow as a snail. So as we understand that the similarity is drawn on a similar quality, that is slowness or laziness of a person, that is one is compared to a snail. So we however will definitely be surprised to hear someone comparing two lovers with two legs of a draughtman's compass. So comparison to a snail seems likely, that since snail is slow or lazy, if somebody acts like that, that man or a woman can too be compared to a snail. But if a writer says that he and his beloved are the two legs of a compass, you are surprised, you are bewildered, you are baffled. Such comparisons are referred to as conceits, because a conceit examples or exemplifies something that is a shock or a surprise for the reader. So the effect of shock on the readers is because of the fact that these comparisons are novel, these comparisons are unusual and unlike, and the conventional comparisons which are made between two similar things, they surprise us. For example, such comparisons which replete the romantic poetry or which are abundantly found in the poetry of the Elizabethan poets, where a lover would compare his beloved with moon or with star or with breeze or with flower or with roses or with the waves of the sea. Now such comparisons have become quite simple and known and common. Now if a writer or a poet draws a comparison from the field of either mineralogy or geometry or science, then it would evoke a sense of freshness for the reader. It would let the reader exercise his mind to understand why these two unlike things have been compared. So these things which we refer to as conceit or term as conceit are unusual comparisons which were more famous in the poetry of the metaphysical poets, because metaphysical poets make use of conceit more than any other poets. And this conceit, for example, when John Donne in his poem Valediction Forbidding Morning compares himself and his beloved to the two legs of a compass, a reader gets a feeling of surprise that how unromantic, how unconventional this comparison is. The two lovers could have been red rose and its fragrance. The two lovers could have been the shore and the sea. The two lovers could have been the sun and the rays of the sun. The two lovers could have been moon and moonlight. The two lovers could have been the air and the blossom. The two lovers could have been the bird and the song. But how strange it is that the two lovers are compared to the two legs of a compass, the geometrical instrument. So if a writer states that the completion of a circle depends upon the firmness of one leg and the movement of the other, he is making us feel convinced that the two lovers act in the same way, the way the two legs of compass act to complete a circle on a piece of paper. So this is how you understand the incongruous seems congruous or believable on closer scrutiny or understanding. So this is what a conceit demands. A conceit would always appear to be unusual or incomprehensible comparison, which you would dismiss in the first place as impossible. But on a closer scrutiny and understanding, you would realize that these two things which are compared make sense. And this is new as well, because conceits are not such comparisons which writers repeat. Metaphors might be the same, repeatedly used in poetry and literature, but conceits seldom are repeated by the authors, and they are always more show the sense of inventiveness of the author. The author, like a scientist, would invent a conceit for himself and for his poetry, which would extend an idea, elaborate an idea, which might be the same experience or feeling or emotion, but the reader might not have looked at that emotion or experience or feeling from that angle. For example, the unity and the sincerity of two lovers is not an unusual idea. It's a common idea that has been repeatedly presented in poetry. But when two lovers' unity, their sincerity, their faith has been explained with the help of the conceit of a compass, where the two legs are joined at one end and the firmness of one leg at a single point ensures the movement of the other leg and the completion of the circle too. So if the fixed leg wavers, the moving leg cannot complete the circle or be back at the same point. So it makes us feel convinced that how never ever before we learned or heard about such a thing that could have been possibly explained with the help of maybe so uncouth and unlikely and a thing like a compass. Now these are the figures of comparison that we looked at. For example, we started with the figure of comparison that is metaphor, the figure of comparison that is simile, the figure of comparison that is you can say conceit, as well as personification. So these four devices are referred to as figures of comparison, in which one thing is compared with another, usually unlike, usually unusual, which you on a surface level may not find any similarity, but on the more closer understanding and deeper understanding, you get to know the implicit meaning and the implicit comparisons as well as the similarities. Now, apart from the figures of comparison, tropes also include some figures which we refer to as figures of addition or amplification, and one such figure is hyperbole. Now, as the very title suggests, that figures of addition would add more further meaning to an idea or a thing. So, figures of addition would add to the meaning. They would build meaning, exaggerate meaning, intensify meaning. One such figure which adds meaning, which intensifies meanings, or which multiplies meaning is referred to as hyperbole. Hyperbole is a very common device which we also often use in our speech. For example, if I say that I have been waiting for you for years, I've been waiting for you for ages, or ages have passed since I last saw you. So if I say ages have passed since I last saw you, I do not mean to say it literally. I might not have been standing for years and ages at a single point waiting for you. Rather, I'm exaggerating that maybe I'm waiting for so many hours. That's why I'm telling you that how long I have been waiting for you. So such exaggerations, like if you say, I'm so hungry that I can eat a horse. Now you do not literally mean that you need to eat a horse. You mean to say that you need a big meal. That is, the extent of your hunger. Or if you say that he's as cold as ice, there you also want to exaggerate it with the help of a simile, that you don't want to show to the reader that the person whom you have referred to has been quite devoid of emotions and feelings. He might not be like an ice, but you are saying that he's as cold as ice. So look how even a simile can exaggerate an idea or a thing. Now these figures which are referred to as figure of addition, we will study one figure of addition and its opposite too. That would be a figure that minuses the qualities of a thing. The figure of addition is hyperbole. Hyperbole is also referred to as exaggeration, or it is also called overstatement. So when you use a figure that is hyperbole, it is an overstatement or it is an exaggeration too. So exaggeration, overstatement and hyperbole are the three statements used for a single figure of speech, that is hyperbole. The word hyperbole has been derived from Greek word meaning overcasting. So it's a figure of speech which involves an exaggeration, an amplification of ideas for the sake of emphasis, for the sake of intensity. It is a device that we employ in our day-to-day speech as well, in our conversations as well. For instance, when you say to somebody that you have been waiting for them for ages, you do not literally mean that you have been standing at a single point for so many years. You mean to intensify that the person is late. So the use of word ages exaggerates this statement to add emphasis on your wait. Therefore, a hyperbole is an unreal exaggeration to emphasize the real situation. So reality is distorted, or reality is intensified, or something more is added to a reality. That is why we call it overstatement or exaggeration. The way I say that I will not talk to you ever again. Now it may not be the reality, but that is exaggeration, that the person showing her annoyance and anger is saying that she would never ever speak to them again. Or if somebody says that I am so hungry that I can eat a horse, he's implying that he would eat too much, he can eat a lot now. Now another example of hyperbole can be seen in Shakespeare's play Macbeth. Now it's a very effective use of hyperbole to give a sense of the feeling and emotions of the character, that the character is intensifying his feeling of pain, his feeling of guilt, his feeling of regret, and that he does with the help of hyperbolic statements and expressions. Now, what sort of hyperbolic statements and expressions does the character use? We see Macbeth saying, Neptune's ocean, wash this blood. Clean from my hand, no, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red. Now, he wants the Neptune's oceans wash his blood, and this hand will never be clean. It cannot be cleaned even by the multitudinous seas. Not a single sea, but many seas cannot clean or erase the blood that is there on Macbeth's hand, the blood of the king. And it's making the green red. So Macbeth, the tragic hero of the tragic play Macbeth, feels the unbearable prick of his conscience after killing the king, King Duncan, and he regrets his sin. And he regrets his sin and believes that even the oceans of the greatest magnitude cannot wash the blood of the king off his hands. And we notice the effective use of hyperbole in the given lines, that how a person states that if all the seas in the universe can be collected and their water used to cleanse or to chastise Macbeth, it will be useless. They may not clean it. Now, this is hyperbolic, that a little water is enough to clean the hands. A handful of water is enough to clean the hands. But here, since the hands are tainted with the blood or the killing or the murder, nothing can undo it. Nothing can really erase the guilt and the burden of the sin or the punishment that he is facing now. So this is the hyperbolic expression which the writer has used for the sake of giving the depth of emotions and the intensity of the emotions which a character feels to the reader. So conveying something through a hyperbole or overstatement or exaggeration, there is an effective use or means of conveying those emotions which might not have been felt by the reader had it been revealed superficially. Now, apart from hyperbole, that is a figure of amplification or addition where meanings are exaggerated or added or overstated, there is its opposite as well. Now, the device that is the opposite of hyperbole is referred to as litotes. Now, litotes are referred to as such a device which would be an understatement. So, if hyperbole was an overstatement, litotes is an understatement. In hyperbole, we exaggerate, we add meaning, we intensify meaning. In litotes, we subtract meaning, we remove meaning, or we want to convey a more milder sense of an emotion and idea. So the word litotes has been derived from the Greek word meaning simple. It is a figure of speech which employs an understatement by using double negatives, or in other words, positive statements which are expressed by negating its opposite expression. So in an understatement or in litotes, we may make use of double negatives, or positive statement is expressed by negating its opposite expression. Look at the example, then you'll understand how a positive statement is negated by its opposite, or how double negatives are also used to create the effect of understatement. Not too bad. So when you say not too bad for very good, it's an understatement. So you do not say very good, rather you say not too bad. So you are understating something. So instead of praising somebody with the word very good or excellent or good, you say not too bad. It means that something that is not too bad would of course be good. So you are understating it. You are, lessening the, force of your praise. So it is an understatement as well as a double negative statement that confirms positive idea by negating its opposite. So its opposite is negated. What's the opposite? Something is bad. So it is said something is not bad. When something is not bad, you mean to say that it is good, but you're not saying that it's good. Rather, you're understating it that it's not too bad. Similarly, observe these examples. If say that she is not a beauty queen. So it means that she is ugly. You don't want to say that somebody is ugly, somebody is not pretty. So instead of saying that she is not pretty, she is ugly, you say she is not beauty queen. And if you say, I'm not as young as I used to be, here also you are understating that what you mean to say is that I'm old now. So you don't want to say that you are old, because it would be too forceful, too harsh a reality to bear or express, too heavier truth to bear, that you are growing old. So you say that I'm not as young as I used to be. So when you are not young, you are old. That is what you are understating. So when somebody is not a beauty queen, she is ordinary, she is ugly, she is not pretty. So this is what litotes perform in our expression, in our speech, in our writing too, when the effect of something is reduced or lessened or made more mild, because otherwise the reality would be too harsh to bear, too much forceful to bear. So if you don't want to praise somebody, because other people would not be happy if you praise somebody, you say it's not too bad instead of saying not too good. When you don't want to say that somebody would be offended, because if you say that they are ugly, they're not pretty, you say that they are not beauty queen. And then saying that you have grown old would be a harsh reality to accept. So you say, I'm not as young as I used to be. So not being young is simply being old. So this is litotes, that is an understatement, that is the opposite of hyperbole or overstatement or exaggeration. So today we had a look at the tropes which involve comparison, and in our understanding of the tropes of comparison or figures of comparison, we observed metaphor, simile, hyperbole, and conceit. And we also looked at how these four types of comparative devices are different. And also we looked at another category of the tropes, which is figures of amplification or figures of addition, in which we looked at hyperbole. And also with hyperbole we looked at its opposite. If hyperbole is overstatement, exaggeration, and addition of meaning, then the litotes is the subtraction or more understatement or a mild expression for something that would be harsh, brutal, or stark, or reality to bear. So today we observed, with the help of examples from poetry as well as a few plays, the use of litotes and hyperbole. And hyperbole is exaggeration, litotes is understatement. And these understatements and exaggerations are used to add spice and flavor to the writing. Writers often use it for the sake of making the meaning more, you can say, implicit. Because if something is exposed directly or openly, it would become hard for the reader to bear. And we do not really directly want to offend people with certain things. So that is why a milder expression, a softer expression, or sometimes if we want to intensify something, a hyperbolic expression might be added. So in the figures of comparison, we looked at the fact that how a writer would transfer meaning from one domain to another by comparing two unlike things, unusual things which do not match. But when a reader finds a similarity, he finds a match, he finds the relationship, and finding the relationship, he understands the points of similarity between the two dissimilar things. So this is what we looked at in our study today, that involved the understanding of the figures of speech. So in our understanding of the tropes and schemes and tropes, we have covered up till now the figures which involve repetition, which were the figures involving repetition at the level of sound as well as at the level of words. We are also done with figures involving semantic irregularities. We have also covered today figures involving comparison. And also today we looked at figures which involve addition or amplification. So in our next lecture we will observe figures which involve substitution. Substitution means how one figure would be replaced with another, or one thing would be replaced with another. And apart from the figures of substitution, we will also have a look at some other very prominent and more often used tropes which a writer in poetry and plays as well as in novels make use of to add meaning to their writing, or in the more accurate and literary terms which are used by the writers to create the effect of foregrounding. So we are observing which figures of speech and literary devices as schemes and tropes work to foreground parts of literary writing. So in our understanding of the concept of foregrounding, we looked at parallelism as the device of similarity, deviation as a device of creating disorder, imbalance, and now deviations and tropes are achieved through either the help of similes, metaphors, personifications, hyperbole, or even the use of litotes. So these are all devices which are used to create deviation in a text. Thank you.